Good afternoon to all of you in the UK and Europe, and good morning to our friends and colleagues in North America. I'm Peter Martin, I'm your chair for today. I'm also Vice President of CGA, the leading insight specialist in the international out-of-home market, and I'm founder of the Atlantic Club, our international community of senior executives and entrepreneurs from across the hospitality and leisure sector. Now, the club allows like-minded people to come together to share best practice, gain new insights, and connect and learn from both global and local experts. And it was actually this time last year we were all gathering in Washington, DC for a 3-day tour. Yes, back in live days. But COVID has stopped all that sort of meeting up and we have gone virtual. So welcome to this, our third pandemic webinar, jointly hosted by Atlantic Club and CGA and partnered by Harrison, Harry and Herman Stewart. In these COVID-affected times, it is more important than ever to exchange experiences and hear about the creative ways that businesses are navigating the difficult path through the ever-changing global hospitality landscape. Restaurant and bar businesses are being forced to adapt, both operationally and culturally, to this new market reality. Today's online discussion is about how all brands, and not just big global names, can maintain their presence in increasingly locally focused markets and also grow outside their home patch. So today we'll be talking brand values, business culture, and changing leadership styles. We've brought together some really great speakers to help us do that. From Wisconsin, we are delighted, really delighted to have the legendary leadership guru, Jim Sullivan. From Mexico City, we've got Barry McGowan, CEO of Fogo de Chão, the international upscale restaurant brand. From New York City, Luke Fryer, founder of Harry. From Maryland, Terry Varner, president of Herman Stewart. We've got Harrison's US design director, Sarah Jenkinson, and Alex Martin, US Retail Services Director at Nielsen CGA. Awful lot of experience there. So let's look at the agenda. We're starting with a scene set from Alex, combining CGA's data from the UK and US, as well as new data we've received from Australia and Canada, looking at how tough restrictions around the globe are affecting consumer attitudes and sales. Sarah will then join us to discuss how brands should be and actually are redesigning for the new trading landscape while keeping their brand culture intact. Then I'll be joined by Terry Varner for a Q&A session talking about where growth is continuing in the US and where he's being kept busy. Then we're going to shift emphasis to people and culture with Jim Sullivan, talking about what he's seeing out in the market and how his own business has changed. During that conversation, we'll be bringing in Luke Fryer to explore how the workplace experience is changing too. Then finally, it's Barry McGowan, old friend of mine. Barry used to work in the UK years ago with Brinker. Now he's CEO of Fogo de Chão. We'll be talking about what he's seeing out there in the markets he operates in. So don't go away. We've got a lot to talk about. Now, importantly, you can get involved too and ask questions, so please do. Just write in using the instructions on your control panel. The session's also being recorded. That will be sent to you later along with any of the slides we use. So let's get underway with Alex Martin, US Retail Services Director at CGA's US operation, Nielsen CGA. Alex, all yours.
Hi, everybody. So, as we know, market restrictions have continued to fluctuate across both the US and the UK. We approximate that approximately 10 to 20% of UK venues may possibly never reopen based on our business confidence survey. And in the US, it could be up to 30% of venues could see the same fate. However, for those that have reopened and remained open, understanding how they're trading really is key. We can see the impact of these measures on the UK outlets. As sales from Copper Peach data shows that rate of sale was down 25% in the week to October 5th. This is disappointing, especially after a strong August fueled by Eat Out to Help Out. It does really show that when government encouragement is there, people will go out to the hospitality industry. However, it is fully expected that with the introduction of increased restrictions across the on-premise in areas of the UK, sales will continue to fall, with pubs and bars really continuing to fare worse than restaurants. In the US, we actually have an even more complicated set of restrictions than the UK. It varies by state, by city, down to county and town level, with very little cohesiveness between them, and in a lot of cases actually slightly more draconian than we have in the UK. Here we have velocity rate or rate of sale down at 16% versus last year. And these velocity figures actually are mainly driven by food-led venues. As across a number of states, we're still seeing bar openings prohibited, where no opening is allowed at all, or actually at best only 25% of indoor capacity with only table services allowed. The difference in the US is that consumers probably aren't being actively encouraged not to go to hospitality venues where they have been open. However, I think it is also key to note that businesses in the US and staff there have received very little to no help from the government. Therefore, if restrictions do increase and cases increase, we could see quicker and deeper impact in the States than the US. And as restrictions in the US are not as clear-cut or uniform, we are seeing quite vast differences in recovery. One clear trend that has emerged is the areas which were the quickest to open up and have reduced restrictions are getting back to last year's levels of sales. It just goes to show really that consumers will return, as they also have already been reassured by the safety measures that have been put in place. Outlet mix in the US market is also fluctuating. We have shifted towards more food-led operations where bars have closed, which means we are seeing slightly higher check values than we have last year, which is also giving sales a boost. This is in no way saying that the on-premise in the US has recovered, but there are parts of the market that have been able to weather the storm slightly better than others. Texas here is actually an interesting state to mention, as here bars were only really allowed to open from October 15th. Slight growth in velocity levels have been by eating outlets. Have made use of those large outdoor areas and nicer weather to boost traffic. Now, quickly looking at a few states with varying restrictions. New York, as we know, was the hardest hit at the start of the pandemic. New York City especially so, and still have some of the strongest restrictions across states. Velocity in the city is down considerably, especially in part due to the fact that indoor dining is only allowed at 25% capacity since the start of October. And we are also starting to see the threat of a rollback of restrictions looming, which could falter this recovery further. Louisiana is then an interesting one. It's more middling in terms of the restrictions there, but it does highlight the impact of restrictions that are centred on cities. Restrictions across most of Louisiana have been a lot more relaxed, whereas in New Orleans, we still have enforced closures and more of a to-go operating model in place, which means sales there really haven't started to see their full recovery. And then we have the state of Florida, where restrictions have pretty much all but been removed. Consumers are back in the on-premise and they're back spending. Areas such as Miami, where restrictions were slightly later to relax, they are slightly behind state performance. And then obviously we have Orlando, which has a slightly higher tourist dependency. However, as we're all aware, the shape and nature of the on-premise in the US has changed, it's contracted and it's continuing to flex, which just highlights how important it really is to understand the landscape and where those pockets of growth are for both suppliers and retailers in the market. In the UK, we're continuing to see that polarisation between urban and rural areas. Our Trend Index data shows us that city centres are still struggling, and this is actually before the full force of more restrictions that have come into effect. Different trends by city have also emerged. As restrictions are starting to kick in, and we talked about this is data to October 10th, where we can see that before full restrictions in place, COVID cases were rising, and actually that sales dip had already started to begin across some key cities. And that continued drop in sale has also been seen this weekend across different areas. So businesses in the very high alert area in England, where pubs and bars can only remain open if they serve a substantial meal. There's also a ban on household mixing in these areas. So daily sales dropped to between 60 and 62% year on year, Thursday to Saturday. And this drop's been driven primarily by drink sales. Businesses in Tier 2, which have still got restrictions, but probably not to the same level, have also seen a significant drop in trading. Sales here are down between 46 and 54% between the 15th and 17th of October. As we've already seen, these sales levels are actually very similar to that we've seen in the US, at levels that cities have been trading at throughout the last 6 months. This highlights the huge commonality actually we do have across on-premise markets, especially in our city centres. But the other big question that remains is, what is the impact of these restrictions also on consumer confidence, as we've seen the sales numbers? On the whole, consumers are still going back to the on-premise, but that steady growth is starting to flatten. Increasing infection rates and talk of new restrictions being imposed in key cities such as Chicago and New York, talk of rollback or pausing of reopening across other states, has meant that consumer confidence has very slightly started to falter in the US, while in the UK, growth rates in the number of consumers going out has flattened. Australia is possibly the most confident at the moment, which is possibly because infection rates across the country do remain low following stricter lockdowns in many areas. But also in Australia, as we have seen in other markets, confidence from consumers is lower in Melbourne than the rest of Australia. It highlights that the plight of cities is the same globally. That shift towards local, the shift out of city centres is happening across all markets. So retailers and suppliers will have to adapt to really understand new consumer needs. Where are consumers going to be? And more importantly, how do we get them back into the city? Outside of the three-tier system currently at play in the UK, there are also other restrictions in place that have dented consumer confidence. So the introduction of the 10 PM curfew and mandatory masks in venue has impacted consumer confidence, with some consumers looking like they will go out less. But there are a few number of consumers who are slightly more confident, mainly due to the fact that they cited increased social distancing due to table service, the increased use of masks as reasons. But I think also really importantly is that desire from consumers to continue to support businesses that are already struggling. While for those whose confidence has been dented, increased cases and genuinely the public's inability to be able to follow the rules were key reasons that were cited for their lack of confidence. Frequency of visits to the on-premise is also likely to be impacted by increasing restrictions, with 53% of UK consumers stating they will go out less frequently or actually not at all with the 10 PM curfew. And it is our city and town centres and pubs and bars, which are the areas of the market which consumers are less likely to visit while the 10 PM curfew is still in place. What's also interesting, but probably not a big surprise to anyone, is that 30% of consumers have also said they will seek out alternative locations to continue to socialise after 10 PM, with 34% also saying they'll invite friends back to their houses to continue the night. I think the key point here and the key question is, if this many people will openly admit to these behaviours, I would expect that the real number may be significantly higher, which highlights the impact of the 10 PM curfew is having on businesses, but then may have a limited impact on infection rates and limiting social contact. Now, while these restrictions are in place, and whether we agree with them or not, or whether we like them or not, I think the one thing we can all agree on is that as an industry, we'll continue to adapt to the situation and continue to ensure that consumers are still getting that experience that they want, and one that boosts their confidence in return. And the key thing here is that across the UK, US, Canada, and Australia, consumers are satisfied with what they're finding when they re-enter the on-premise. Delivering that experience and continuing to deliver that experience to consumers is also key in attracting consumers to your venue. In the US, we've seen consumers are now staying in one place or visiting fewer venues, which makes that initial outlet choice and that initial being able to catch that consumer on their initial choice is really important moving forward. But also their behaviours are changing. They are willing to spend more than they were pre-COVID on those visits, be that on tips, a treat for themselves, increased food or drink spend, or actually increasing their premium offers. It just goes to show that while the industry is adapting, consumers are also adapting their habits to be able to continue to enjoy the on-premise, create that experience, but also do it in a way where they continue to feel safe. Australian consumers are also showing that there is cause for optimism, as 2/3 do plan to visit the on-premise at the same or an increased frequency to 2019. Demonstrates that while no one can deny that currently trading conditions are incredibly tough across all markets, consumers do plan to and will return to the on-premise. There are also a number of chains in the UK who we've seen who have already done a great job at attracting consumers back with high satisfaction levels. This list is by no means exhaustive of those who have delivered high satisfaction ratings or have got a high proportion of their consumers back, but it's an example of those that already have. Alongside this, there are also operators who are continuing to expand and open new outlets, with the likes of Loungers, Brewdog, Tim Hortons, Velvet Taco in the US all kind of springing to mind. With consumers continuing to invest in retailers continuing to invest in their offers, suppliers and the whole chain needs to continue to invest in their partners and the on-premise so we can all find our way through this pandemic. So finally, to conclude. So while we're all feeling those local pains of lockdowns and restrictions, this really is a global phenomenon across Western cities and markets. Each on-premise market is all feeling it to very similar extents. There is still a core consumer who wants to visit and support the on-premise, and when they are visiting, they are reassured and they are satisfied with the experience that they are receiving. If you can attract consumers to your venues, they will stay with you and they are willing to spend more than they did pre-pandemic as well. And finally, the on-premise has changed, and as suppliers and retailers, we really have to understand our consumers, understand our customers to ensure we are really delivering what they want and what they need to aid that return and to aid and increase the frequency of visits. And in return, we will all be rewarded, obviously, with those much needed sales. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Alex. I think what it shows quite clearly is that it's tough out there for all of us out there. But in certain parts of the world, you know, people are having to get on with it, and you know, here in UK as well, where life is pretty tough. Yeah, people are providing a better quality of service in some cases than others. So it's going to continue to be tough, but there are signs of hope out there, reasons to be cheerful perhaps. Alex, thank you for that, and I know you're going to be joining us a bit later on. So now let's move on from that and let's build on that data and look at what a strong brand and what a strong brand is all about, and if those attributes are still pertinent in now in post-COVID world. Please join me now, and her presentation is ready. Please join me, Sarah Jenkinson, who is US Design Director with Harrison.
Hi, thanks, Peter. Sorry, I had a bit of a glitch there with technology, and thanks for.
Don't worry, we can hear you, but we can't see you at the moment. So can we have your camera on? And
oh, you want? Okay, hang on a minute. Sorry, everybody, I'm new to this. There you go. Can you see me?
Excellent. Well, I'm going to leave you, and we're going to hear your presentation.
Okay, perfect.
Excellent.
So, hi everyone. Thanks again. And I'm going to be talking through how to keep your brand alive through touch points in a snapshot. And I just want to demystify what touch points are. Touch points are anything that the consumer and your guest sees, whether it's online from your YouTube, your web, your ordering system, Twitter, Instagram, to offline, which is very much about your posters, your banners, any flyers, to anything that's in person. So the curbside pickup, the drive-through, the restaurant, anything that you touch. So it's anything that you touch, smell, hear, and taste is a touch point. And what's the touch point to success is really understanding who your guest is making sure that they're falling in love and staying in love with you. It's about the storytelling and the narrative that you're doing, and it has to touch everything in your customer experience. It's the agility and adaptability to your business, and we've really seen that in the forefront of the pandemic. And then customization and also sustainability and well-being. And I think really the interesting thing with this is that some of these trends were in the periphery of everybody's mindset, sort of before pre-pandemic. And then all of a sudden they've jumped 5 years in trends and become at the forefront. So there's been a change in how consumers are actually behaving and wanting to see through their from their brands. And it's very much, I love this quote by Jeff Bezos. And it's really about going back to basics. We're in the hospitality and the leisure trade, and it's all about inviting our guests to a party. And we are the hosts. And as hosts, wherever we are, we have to look our guests into the eye and make it something that really touches them and touches your guests. So that experience is always has to be a little better every single time to maintain that kind of retention. When we're falling, what you mean by falling and staying in love is brands are really like people. They have characteristics of people, whether they want to be your friend or, you know, your lover or your partner for life. And it's just sort of, as soon as we behave in a certain sort of a way, we can become quite disillusioned by them. So this whole culture of swiping left and right is really is becoming quite prevalent. So we have to maintain that what we do as our values, our core values, how we behave to our consumers and our guests, you know, as our guests as people, that actually you have to behave like it or you'll just lose them. So it's really making sure that you're building this really lovely, long-lasting relationship with them. And during sort of like our time, and when we look at brands, we make sure that a customer experience is always looked at from every single touch point. And we've done a really lovely exercise recently with Maggiano's, and everything in that journey, from the way that you're greeted from the curbside to then how you come out of it and you're given chocolates and the goodbye message, has to be really thought about. And as people, we're all about stories, and we're all about like making stories for ourselves and telling those stories. Brands are storytellers as well, and we have to make memories that people will remember to create that retention. So it's really, every part of that every touch point has to have a memory associated to it, whether it's a nice piece of tone of voice on your web page, or whether it's a really nice piece of a goodbye message. It's everything is actually thought about, and you'll tell those memories and those experiences to your friends, and then that creates a whole load of brand currency, or as we know as currency in the trade. So it gives you real big leverage. Storytelling, as a brand, you have to really storytell that narrative. And one of the greatest storytellers of our time is really Nike. And you might think, oh God, here's another Nike example, but they really are brand leaders. And although we're in the hospitality and the leisure industry, I think we can take some, we can really understand and take knowledge from them and use it into our sector. Their storytelling really tells the backstory of who they actually are. Their Just Do It campaign was created in 1988 and is still going forward today. And they use it as part of their DNA. Everything that they do has a story behind it, whether it's a political story like we've seen during the pandemic, or whether it's like in 2018, it was very much about the stories of people, and they really showed it and really expressed it as well, and really showcasing it. So they're actually connecting with their audience on every single level. It doesn't just stop on the internet or through digital platforms. It goes into the actual physical stores as well, whether it's the House of Innovation. So Nike Customization ID is now such a big part of their business. It's never going to go away. So then Nike Live, they're using technology in a really clever way, where everything is demographic in terms of all the items that are being sold is actually what the local demographic actually need. So then the Nike Rise, which was launched in this year in 2020, that's really about putting the Nike member and the community at the heart, and it's discovering their stories and celebrating their stories in terms of what they're doing for their exercise and sportsmanship. So it's really becoming inclusive. And storytelling is done in such different ways. And one of the things that I've seen really with the pandemic is that brands are behaving quite altruistic. And Super Jam is a Scottish company. It's real grassroots. It was created by a boy and his gran at the age of, he was 14. A jam that is 100% fruit with no additives or extra sugar. But along that journey, within 2 years, he was really celebrating and doing tea parties or Scottish tea parties for the elderly. And anybody in the UK know that the elderly are put out to pastures. And this was real about celebration, giving it back. It was all for free. And now what he's created is a worldwide tea party across globally, from UK to Denmark to South Korea. And during the pandemic, what we saw is brands really behaving in selfless acts. So we had the likes of Nando's and Rosa Mexicana, who was giving back to either the NHS or health workers, or Fogo de Chão, who didn't want any child to go hungry. So we're becoming very much more, as brands, we're behaving quite selflessly. And this is only going to become more prevalent as brands go forward. And the brands that haven't been quick to react to this kind of market are the brands that are going to sort of waste away and we're not going to hear about. And those are the things that people really start to remember. And then this is really sort of, oops, sorry, having technical difficulties there. This is really sort of on the other end of the spectrum. Pre-pandemic, using technology was starting to become really immersive, and this 4D, and the Spice Trail of Marco Polo was created in this real 4D, this 4D experience. And skull mapping is really fascinating, and although that this is a big experience, that skull mapping can start to be formulated into experiences for now and then as we're coming out of the pandemic. And it will be interesting to see how this starts to be used. You could use it in a private dining room for instance, and really start to customize it to however your guest actually wants that experience. So you can start to see that storytelling really sells, it really resonates with people, and it really starts to connect. And again, it's, you know, understanding and making sure that we have, you know, we understand our values, our personality, to actually then connect with our consumer. I mean, this is one of the biggest things that have really happened during the pandemic, is really that agility and adaptability to be able to change. And it's making sure that we're changing without losing our purpose. So it's us becoming responsive and having the ability to diverse, but it's also about being true to your actual values. If you're not true to your values, then you start to lose people. And one of the, I mean, I love BrewDog. I think they're great, they're very clever. You can say they've got clever marketeers, but I just think that, you know, they're obviously passionate about who they are and what they do, and they had a real impact in the UK market in terms of, they were quick to market in terms of the fact that the UK didn't have the hand sanitizers, so they produced a whole load of hand sanitizers. And then they had a real political message when Dominic Cummings, the Boris's guru advisor, then didn't want to do what he was actually advising, and had this quirky eye test can, which was really about, you know, it was really expressing the state of the nation, to then making sure that, you know, their community, their tribe, their guests were actually connected with, and doing and creating this whole online bar, so they weren't losing people, because at this time, you know, the people's mindsets were becoming in question, and it was really about bringing our community really together. And then I'm sure Barry will talk about this later, that the Fogo de Chão were amazing. Before the pandemic hit, they didn't have an online ordering system, and they created the Fogo to go and bring in the whole Fogo experience into your home. And they did it, their team got together and they did it within 48 hours. And actually, you know, they responded so quickly that it's become quite a big part of their business going forward. And as you can see, it's sort of like they're not forgetting who they are. It is all about the gaucho. It's about Brazilian culture, and you know, they got Antonio, their head chef, to do a YouTube. So everything is actually connected. So they're not losing sight of who their actual guests and their consumers are. And then in the UK, Steve Parler and Tom Dixon. Tom Dixon used to have his store at Portobello Docks, and they wanted to give back to the community and really help what was going on in this world and to the local area by doing an online farm, a farm shop. They had beehives and they were selling honey, and they sold flowers that were meant to be at some of the flower shows and they couldn't be shown, so they were selling them there. So it was really bringing a positivity, a transparency back to the local area and really reacting to the market. Customization. I mean, I'm going to show some low-tech examples here, but it is all about the me culture. And going forward, personalization is really key, and it's using data in a clever way rather than a way that becomes confusing or less responsive to the customer. And it's about creating this ultimate touch point. And Make and Take in Bulgaria have done the whole Starbucks. They've taken their online data and personalized the actual pizza boxes, so it becomes a much more, it's personalized to my choice, and it feels that it's being made by Fresh. And also Zizzi's have been clever pre-pandemic, that they really looked at their packaging. So their packaging worked in a way that it's really being used as the end user. So you can start to see this zigzag box. That's all about their sharing platters, and it's actually key, and it's really inclusive to your dinner party at home. Or they were looking at their packaging from the pizza box, and it's doubled layered, so it could get into a Deliveroo case much easier. And this is really sort of innovative and creative work, but it's really thinking about what the end user and how they're actually going to use it. Then sustainability and well-being, I think that this is really being pushed up the scale a bit, and this is becoming, I think, a very much more about housekeeping of every single brand. We have to be ecologically accountable and transparent. We have to be proactive on the impact of our environment, and we're less about throwaway culture. We're not just seeing this in the hospitality industries, we're seeing it across every single sector, from your fast clothing brands that are becoming much more sustainable and organic. So it's something that we can't forget. And Whiskey Cake, which is part of the Front Burner Group, that have been really, I mean, this is just a really lovely story in terms of what they're actually doing for the community. They're creating a real local ecosystem, a financial system for that demographic, and it's very much about taking it from the farm to the kitchen, being all made by scratch. It's also sourced locally and regional, and then that story is also translated into the website and to sort of like the menus in the restaurants. And it's real providing, again, this real ecosystem for the community. And then Oaxaca was really the first chain in the UK to have this sustainability policy from 2016. They are carbon neutral. It's all about the sourcing of ingredients, the landfill policies of the food waste, and and that being turned into biogas and compost is all really important for our consumer. And and then this goes into everything that the consumer and your guest is touching, from zero plastics policy to the low impact packaging to recycling. So this example really shows how you have this totality of touch points. And really, it's sort of like the real success is really about the attention to detail. And that attention to detail should never really be lost. That sight should never be lost through the guest experience. With all the pressures of your business, you know, the guest is key here and the detail is key. And thank you. Thanks for listening.
Well, thank you, Sarah. That was great. I mean, what it shows is we've got an awful lot of people working extremely hard with creativity to try and get through these really tough times. And I think it's the ability to share ideas across the world is really encouraging. Sarah, I think we need to lose your screen share now, but apart from that, that's fine. Now, we want to move on now to get, having looked at the data, having looked at what brands are individually doing and how some of those brand approaches pre-COVID are now being adapted post-COVID. Let's see what's happening on the ground. I want to introduce an old friend of mine, one of our backers at Atlantic Club, Terry Varner, who is president of Herman Stewart. Terry, join us. Terry, now, how's things in Maryland at the moment?
Well, they're okay. They're not great, but they're okay.
And I think that's probably what we can say everywhere. Now, obviously, Terry, I mean, what you do is you go and build restaurants and bars around the US. You work for a lot of big brands, for Panera, Houston's, P.F. Chang's, and obviously UK-based brands like Nando's. I say UK-based brands, it's South African, but the headquarters is here, and of course Leon as well. So what's, you know, how's your business been affected? I know we've had these conversations before in previous webinars, but how is it developing? Are you getting work through, and what sort of things are you seeing on the ground?
Yeah, we're still getting some opportunities. I mean, the market's definitely slowed down quite a bit. I saw a few weeks back, I thought the market was going to pick up, and then as the numbers start to change, as they are, you know, throughout Europe, throughout the US, that I think people's concerned again. So I think people pulling the trigger to start new projects is still going to be a slow process with us now going into winter. Definitely still have jobs going on. Most of the jobs right now is on the East Coast, whether it's New York State, Maryland, DC, Virginia is really where the construction is occurring for us right now. Typically, we'd be in 15 or 16 different states at this point in the year, but we're probably in 4 or 5.
Yeah, you say you're looking at New York State, and obviously we saw from Alex the difference between New York City, particularly Manhattan, who's basically closed down, and what's happening in the States. So what sort of businesses are opening up? What's doing well in the States? Where are people? I suppose what it comes down to, where are people investing?
Well, I still think people's investing in their outside dining anywhere they can. I see a lot of folks. I was just on vacation a couple weeks ago on holiday, and I saw where they had put up some pretty elaborate structures at restaurants. They put power in them, including ceiling fans for when it's warm. They got lights in them. They got sides that come down if it's going to rain or the weather's not conducive. They're putting heaters in these. So I really think the restaurateurs are going to, if they have the ability to have outdoor dining, they're focusing on that because it's going to be their best avenue moving forward for a while. Now, at some point on the East Coast, you know, January, February, March, it becomes pretty difficult to have outdoor dining, even if you've added some type of heating element to it. So I think some of the other stuff that I see is restaurateurs have put a big focus still on the takeaway. So we've seen restaurateurs add other entrances to their restaurants. They're trying to keep the Uber drivers or the Grubhub or whoever their delivery function is separate from the rest of their diners. They're trying to keep them not mingling together. Bars, you know, there's very few restaurants that I go to. I still go out 3 or 4 times a week that you can actually sit at a bar. They're not giving up the seats for when they're on the reduced percentage. So they're still trying to get as many seats inside in the dining area as they can.
Yeah, so drive-throughs are things one of the few things we're seeing built here in UK is either ghost kitchens, or drive-throughs. We've got Tim Hortons still building them over here because they're over in the UK now. Are we seeing a new? Are you seeing more drive-throughs, and are they developing in new ways?
They are. I think I think there's a handful of quick serve or fast food that's adding drive-throughs, or if you take the Chick-fil-A restaurants here in the US, they've done a fabulous job at adapting the drive-throughs they have to something that's even much more efficient. I mean, they have went from a lot of single lane drive-throughs to 2 lanes and 3 lanes. They still end up at 1, but they got a tremendous amount of employees that's working outside. You don't wait to get up to the little order menu box anymore. They're taking your orders on keyless entry devices, and they can put quite a few cars through a drive-through during the lunch hour. I'm going to guess they're putting 400 or 500 cars at the lunch hour through their drive-through process.
That's interesting. So really what you're finding is that people, when people have got business, they're making sure that's efficiently served as possible, and service is key.
Yeah, I mean, I question whether Chick-fil-A will ever open all their dining rooms back up. They've become such a machine at putting them through the drive-through, or you can call ahead, order ahead, and they got parking places, they bring it to you. So they've adapted quite well, and a lot of people's trying to do the same thing. Shake Shack has done something that's trying to improve their process through drive-through to help their business. So everybody's becoming creative.
Well, thanks, Terry, for that update, and I'm sure we'll be talking again before the end of the year. We'll stay in touch. Let's get you back in front of the audience as well. But for the moment, thanks very much. You've given me a very good lead into our next area, where we're going to be talking about service and people, and the expectations of consumers, and how they're being met. As I say, we are now going to be looking at the key areas of people and culture. So it's my great pleasure to welcome the legendary leadership guru, who unfortunately missed his London work masterclass this year because of the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Sullivan, and there he is. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Yourself?
Yeah, fine indeed. And you're obviously in a different part of the US, in Wisconsin, but obviously. Right. You know, I mean, it's interesting to talk about, because we've all changed. I mean, you know, you, as we well know, travel around the States and travel internationally for your conferences and seminars. I mean, how did the pandemic hit you personally?
Well, it hit me in a big way. As you know, I do conduct keynote conferences and workshops around the globe. I do about 35 each year. On March 16th of 2020, I had completed 11 of them, had 24 more to go. And within the next 2 weeks, all 24 of those were postponed or canceled, as you know, with our London program. So like many operators out there, I recognized that I had to pivot and swivel into different areas. So the first thing that I found an opportunity for, and my clients are very interested in, was doing webinars. So we went from live in person to programs like this, and that became pretty popular and pretty successful among clients. All customized webinars focused on leadership development. The other thing I recognize is that the two biggest segments in the U.S., full service restaurants and quick service restaurants, were both hit equally, and yet quick service restaurants were set up to succeed based on what they did and who they are. They already had drive-through, in many cases contactless or minimal contact delivery of food, literal easy takeaway and delivery, etc. So as the QSR clients of ours started to get busier than ever, we realized that one thing that they still needed as they start hiring and developing their people, dealing with the coronavirus and dealing with this new volume, was they needed training, and they needed remote training most specifically. So we pivoted in that regard too. I don't want to overuse the word pivot, but we assembled a team of e-learning experts and put all of our leadership content, which is considerable, online with a new approach kind of to e-learning. And and created customized programs, focus mostly on general manager or unit manager development, and also multi-unit leadership development. And one of the things we learned, because what I hate about e-learning programs is that they're just like school. Most of them, they're kind of boring, and they just cover content. They don't really change behavior. So we took a different approach. We looked at one thing that's never taught in schools or in most training programs is strategic thinking and critical thinking and change management. It's alluded to, but it's not often, directly addressed. So we said, what if we taught people how to think instead of just telling them what to do? And that created a whole great opportunity for a new approach to e-learning, and that was a big way we swiveled, and it's caught on in a big way here because it turns out that strategic thinking is a skill set, as I said, not taught in schools, but extremely needed in restaurants. So then we kind of parlayed all that we know that we learned in creating these custom programs, and we developed our own program called Multi-U 2.0. And just as a plug, that'll be available at a website.
I can do a plug later because we're getting you back on screen in for UK audiences a bit later on in the year, and I'll talk about that. But looking generally, obviously you've talked about QSR well set up, and Terry mentioned that as well. But I mean, overall though, what do you think were the biggest challenges facing sort of people you work with, and some pretty big companies there, and how they responded?
Well, probably the same way that people did in the UK and food service operators did around the world. The first thing was they had to operate without a roadmap. There was no plan on how to deal with a pandemic. There's maybe anticipation of it and a faint guess that something like this could happen, but nobody had a plan. So job one of the most successful operators was not to turn a crisis into a catastrophe, right? And so that was an important leadership lesson. And then not to suffer from the old phrase of paralysis by analysis, because a lot of operators stood in place and said, I'm not sure what to do. And in this business, as always, if you're standing still, you're walking backwards. I think that's true. So being flexible and adapting, being adept at adapting was really key because every day there was a new lesson. And I think a second thing was having to respond and react to this county by county legislation from the government. It was alluded to earlier, I think, by Alex, and that's really true here in the U.S. So if you operate 1,000 restaurants here, you are subject to 1,000 county regulations that you can't be open, you can't be open, you can't have these operating hours, you can't have these operating hours. You're restricted to 25% capacity, 50% capacity, et cetera, et cetera. And then,
sorry. I mean, can I pick up on that, because something you said earlier about how your training is changed. I mean, your seminars talking about critical thinking. I mean, one of the issues we've got sometimes when people are under a lot of pressure, and we're seeing it in certain companies, it becomes more command and control. And actually, people telling people this is the way we're going to do it across a whole brand. But what you're saying, I think, probably is critical, that you need GMs. Able to think, able to react at a local level, and to be trusted.
Yeah, and it's instead of leading from the top, you're kind of leading from the middle. If you look at above store managers, area directors, multi-unit leaders, as I call them, at the outset of the pandemic, they couldn't even visit their restaurants anymore. They were restricted to go in there. So they had to really rely on how well they trained and developed their GMs. And their GMs had to be pretty good at recognizing what worked and what didn't early on. They could get coached remotely, perhaps. But so I think it really showed how strong your leadership team was and how you coach and develop them on a daily basis, because let's not forget, this created a lot of panic too among our team members, among our managers, because I don't think people fear change. They fear uncertainty, the unknown. And boy, if that isn't a definition of what COVID-19 was and perhaps still is, I don't know what is. So I guess the other thing real quickly is how to the other lesson learned was how to successfully furlough and bring back team members.
Yeah.
Here in the U.S., when it hit hard, a lot of people were laid off and furloughed, and so I think recognizing how to find new team members or bring back your new team members, and then realizing you had to reorient them to the current conditions and kind of onboard even people who worked with you before. So I think that's things they learned. And you asked the question of how well the industry responded. Well, the QSR segment in the US responded pretty well. They were set up for drive-through, and they're set up for delivery in many cases. But the full service chains that relied exclusively on indoor dining, many of them are still struggling. Not our good friends at Fogo de Chão, which I know we'll hear more about. But things are changing now. Terry lives in Maryland, which is a relatively warm place in the U.S.
Yeah.
I live in Wisconsin, and that's northern U.S. And I, with apologies to all the Game of Thrones fans out there, winter is coming.
Exactly.
And I don't care how many heaters you have outside. If you live in Chicago or Wisconsin, you're not going to keep that patio and outdoor dining warm enough for people to come see you.
Jim, who's done well? Would you pick anybody out who you think's really done a really good job and has changed their business? I mean, we've already said Chick-fil-A seems to be one. It's already an incredibly popular brand, and as Terry said, probably won't open all their restaurants again. Anybody else who springs to mind?
Well, Texas Roadhouse has done a really good job in the full service category. Again, we'll hear from Barry McGowan from Fogo de Chão, who I think has done a great job. Chipotle has really done they've stayed on a plan, and they've done a really good job of expanding and being successful in this area. Wendy's has done a good job. Domino's is reporting record numbers. Panera is doing really, really good as well here in the US. And I think one thing that probably all those companies have in common is they really have a people first mentality and practice, and they don't just give lip service to it. So I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. And any silver linings out there, do you think?
Well, yeah, there are. I think that one thing of course there is. I don't want to whistle past the graveyard here, but the reality is that, I think we've learned the importance of strategic clarity, making decisions quick, and again, I don't want to use pivot again, but learning how to pivot from things that didn't work to things that did work. Yeah. We've seen the importance of talent density, having good people and having a good pipeline. And in that regard, one thing that COVID has opened up here in the US is because so many companies had to furlough their great team members despite they didn't want to do it. That meant that for the first time in a decade or maybe 2 decades, we had a talent pool available to the people who stayed open. So you could find good people who were willing to work and wanting to work and needing to work. That was certainly a silver lining. And COVID uncovered made bare a lot of our inefficiencies. Another silver lining is that technology, this industry has traditionally been very slow. They're not an early adopter of technology, but I think we've accelerated 10 years in 6 months relative to adopting and adapting technology into our business. We're seeing that with hiring. We're seeing that with app ordering and contactless delivery and third-party apps. But we're also seeing it, and one of the things we're working on is AI in the kitchen, AI and virtual reality and leadership training. So instead of, if you're a multi-unit leader, traditionally you taught the next generation what you learned, but could you take a lot of those skills, again, strategic thinking, critical thinking, change management, and integrate it into a technology that could share that insight as well, so that in a sense, while you're leading, you're building your own replacement. And the answer is, yeah, you can. So I think those are things we've seen that really kind of are some silver linings in here.
Right. Well, that's a good opportunity to bring Luke Fryer in from Harry, because obviously we're talking about talent and how they're coming in. Luke, do you want to join us?
Sure.
I hear you're there. So come and join the conversation with Jim and I. Could you?
I am unmuted.
And have we got your camera on as well, sir?
Peter, I'm not having a lot of luck on the camera.
Right. In that case, you can be our voice in the background, and while you try and do that. Luke, great to hear from you, because obviously you're in New York City, which is probably one of the worst affected areas at the moment. But you know, you're dealing with your people management. I mean, what are some of the problems you're finding out there, particularly around finding staff? Because it seems to me that's going to be one of the big issues. What are you seeing out there?
Thanks, Peter. I think from our perspective is very much sort of both UK and US, and we see sort of, call it New York City problems. We see impacts that are in markets that have significant COVID activity and contrast with those that don't. But the consistent theme we're seeing is that there has been, even though it would seem like there's a flood of talent available, it's actually very hard to fill shifts at the moment. And it's unfortunately a very unpleasant irony. I think if we step back and look at the talent supply issue on a macro basis, we had 15 million people working in restaurants pre-COVID, and the sort of top-down data we can see is that there's about 100,000 restaurants have permanently closed. That's an estimate from the NRA that came out, I believe, last week, and that's equating to somewhere between 2 and 3 million permanent job losses out of that pool of 15 million. Many people will say that, well, there just wasn't enough people anyway, so in some ways that's helpful. But I think what we're missing here is that there is significant structural damage done to the labour supply into the business, into our industry. We surveyed about 8,000 employees on our platform, and about half of those were from the greater New York area, and 75% of them said that they had been permanently displaced. And it's this dynamic where people lived in an expensive city like New York, they had their hospitality job. With that gone, they've gone home. And of course, the UK version of that is going back to the EU country they came from, given the high portion of our hospitality teams that were from the EU. So we have got significant structural displacement that's gone on, and that is going to be a problem for quite some time.
But obviously, but obviously with people in jobs still, there's still that sense of anxiety, both around, it would seem to me anyway, both around in the infection itself, possibly catching the virus, and also job security. I mean, what are you seeing there? Is that becoming a big issue?
Well, actually, the concern around infection is also one of the supply problems. One of the big feeder groups into our industry is 18 to 25-year-olds, and many of those have got influence from their parents saying, "Look, come home. You don't need to work at the moment. We'll support you over this time," or they may not be going to college. Significant challenges there. But beyond the supply concept, look, the anxiety of staff in the workplace on a daily basis, we're all reading the news, we're all seeing the scuffles between employees and guests around masks. I mean, there are many incidents, and that's just an example of the degree of anxiety that's customer facing within the workplace. There's a lot of mistrust. What we've seen is that the concept of employee health checks are actually a significant solve for this anxiety. There is a pretty significant scope of regulation that's actually enforcing that. And as was mentioned before, right, there's 1,000 different variations of local rules around how health checks are meant to be implemented. But we saw most of the large, forward-thinking enterprise groups start to move on this in April and May. They now have well-embedded systems. We're just this week, we actually will complete our 1,000th employee health check on the platform, and just putting the visibility of that process in place both to exist to your employees, having it, just like a visible cue. We give our clients stickers so that once the employees completed the health check and have their temperature taken, they're putting that on their shirt just to show as a visual cue to their co-workers that step has been put in place. And it's little things like that, printing out a manifest of health checks for each day or even for each shift. The team knowing that the company's put the systems and processes in place is going a long, long way.
Yes.
One of the issues we all need to be aware of, though, going into flu season is obviously there are several symptoms of COVID that look a lot like the flu, and we really have to have a well thought through triage process, especially for these employee self checks, right? So it's going to get, that concept of health check is going to get very important, but also needs to be very carefully managed over the next 4 to 6 months.
Jim, can I bring you in now about, because you're obviously talking to companies about how they're dealing with this, and in a sense, it's a new issue for how management and leaders at GM level or further up are having to deal with staff who have different anxieties than perhaps they've had before. How are you helping them handle those sort of issues?
Well, I think there are two things. First, the first goal, of course, like for the stickers that we were just talking about, is to assure the guest as well that the person they're interacting with has been tested and safe. It's you have to be what we've learned is that manager on duty has to be forthright, clear, transparent in his or her communication daily with the team about what's going on, how to minimize the panic or fear. And we also have to recognize that when these people go home, whether they're living with parents, our team members, or they're with friends, those friends and parents are saying, aren't you scared of what you're doing? Don't you interact with a lot of people? I don't know if you should be going with us, or I don't know if we should be here. And, all those things mean that each and every day, instead of just having like a pre-shift meeting where you focus on what to sell and how to smile, the first thing you need to deal with is that we've created a safe environment. We're committed to you first. And because of that commitment, that means we're committed to, both of us are committed to our customers as well. So communication has evolved from just operational basis focus to COVID focus, and reinforcing that each and every day. Here in the US, we're so split politically on this issue that we have to have clear and daily communication about why it's safe to work here and what we're doing to keep you safe.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose the other issue is, particularly as we move towards, I suppose it's that evolving relationship because of the health issues, that evolving relationship between the server, the staff, and customers is pretty crucial because, there's a lot more fast food, there's more takeout, whatever, that's much more functional service rather than hospitality. But you're also we're seeing that in UK, table service is becoming mandatory in certain parts, but actually a lot of our operators are saying actually that's quite an advantage because it allows those members of staff to have more time, and it's actually gives them a chance to upsell. How are you seeing those things evolve as well? I mean, is hospitality still a big thing, or people want efficiency and safety first?
I think that service has killed hospitality. And let me explain what I mean. If you look at a company, a click and order company like Amazon versus a brick and mortar company like our business, think about your Amazon experience. You get great service. Well, let me define the difference first. Service fulfills a need, hospitality fulfills people. So service is done very efficiently at Amazon. You order, you have your account. If you're a Prime member, you get your package within 2 days. If there's a problem, you send it back. That efficiency is incredible and valuable. And you don't get any I've never had hospitality from Amazon. I never have. So, and if you look at that same concept, Terry talked about Chick-fil-A. You go into a Chick-fil-A anywhere here in the US, and in our area, there are 4 drive-ins or 4 lanes that go down to one lane and you'll pull in. Yesterday I was at one. There were 27 cars in front of me at noon. I'm going, this is too far, too long. And then a car pulled right behind me and I couldn't get out of the lane. I had my order and was back on the road in 5.5 minutes. 5.5 minutes. So now there's service there. Of course, you got to smile. So that it was friendly service, but I didn't really see hospitality there. It was efficient, and I value that. However, sit-down restaurants, I think we're going to have and pubs and bars, we're going to have a very a renaissance in what hospitality means, because people are craving that interaction, and so you need to be efficient with your service, but also wherever you can deliver hospitality, especially in face-to-face things, it's going to be more valuable than ever as we continue to come out of this. By the way, I don't think this pandemic is the last one we're going to see, by the way. I'm not being overly pessimistic, but if you look at Asia, they went through SARS, a big SARS epidemic, a big MERS epidemic, and now this one. They successfully have handled all three, and now their economies are growing again. So I think this is going to be part of our game plan going forward.
And I don't want to frighten people about what happened with Spanish flu, which is, I wasn't around. It was over 100 years ago, but it took 2 years. And
I was, and it was tough.
There you go. Luke, can I just bring you in for a final word on this session, because I take you're still there. I mean, in terms of labour practices, in terms of the way people are hiring and looking after staff, I mean, is this a time for major changes? We talk a lot about operations pivoting and changing. What about people's relationship with their staff and how they're going to recruit them?
With so much, with the labour market changing from a sort of talent drought to a talent flood, it's really put an emphasis. There's a big opportunity here for strategically minded employers to really try and get the best talent in to future-proof, or at least, set themselves up for the growth and development of talent over the next 2 to 3 years. We're seeing, after a very, obviously, an initial reaction of let's let our recruitment teams go, HR leadership, HR teams being put on furlough, we're now seeing some really kind of well thought out opportunistic strategies around how do we get the best talent from all that's available. And that is putting a much greater emphasis on the kind of branding that says, hey, we're actually growing for those businesses that are well positioned. We're growing. We have a bright future. We're part of the hospitality renaissance. Come and join us, and getting that message out. Certainly making sure that the tools are available to get that message out to the market is something we've been focused on. Yeah. But where you have 300 people applying for a job versus the 3 you used to have, it's really put an emphasis back on tools around efficient selection. We've been investing heavily in a tool we call Carry, which is a chatbot powered recruitment platform. That has certainly helped clients screen applicants far more efficiently and get them onto the job. But it also ties into this concept that we've seen, we've really seen the inability of our industry to effectively communicate from the top right through to the frontline employee. We've seen that inability laid bare. Where there's anxiety with employees, communicating effectively is really the key. And there's very few companies that were set up to do it. Yeah. And that has allowed for very rapid innovation in communication practices, often tied into scheduling. So it's not just how we're recruiting, it's how we're coming up with that much more systematic communication to employees beyond putting a piece of paper on a notice board.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things there. As Jim always says, I love making your lines. If you want to hide a dead body, put it on the notice board. That's one of my favourite lines of yours, Jim. Luke, thanks very much for joining us, and I hope we can see you next time we do this. And Jim, thanks as well. And now a reminder, actually, we are going to see Jim back on our screens, because Jim, as we said, couldn't make his London masterclass this year. He's going to be back. Our plan is to get him back in the flesh in London next September, 11 months' time. But in the meantime, we've got a couple of events coming up on December the 2nd. Please put that in your diary. Jim is going to give a special, I think, something around 75-minute special session on the 7 leadership lessons of lockdown. And that really is a must when we can build on some of the themes we're seeing here. And as Luke said, it is that communication and how we give power to our frontline teams is going to be really important. And then we're going to have another session, a half-day session with Jim online again in February, where he's going to hopefully reinvigorate teams here in UK. Hopefully we'll have better news about where the market is market is then. For the moment, thank you so much, Jim, and thank you so much, Luke. And we are now going to move on to our final session of the day. See you again soon, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
It's my great pleasure now to introduce an old friend of mine, someone who I met when he was over here in UK. You remembered it was 20 years ago, actually. We were on a panel together. Please welcome Barry McGowan, CEO of Fogo de Chão, big international brand. You are, I understand, in Mexico City today, Barry, rather than Dallas, where your office is.
Yes, we are. So obviously we've got a partner here in Mexico City. He just opened his 5th location, and we're just here spending time with his team as they're going through the same process all of us have to reopen, and he's seeing the market move. It's great to be in Mexico City. The hospitality's high, and wonderful to see, how they're working through it. So again, from London, Mexico City to Dubai, New York, there's a lot of similarities. And I tell you, I just want to share this with all the operators on the call all around the world, that I'm always humbled by the innovation, the adaptability, and just the pure resilience of all of us and all of you and our team members in this industry. So a great panel so far. You guys have covered a lot of ground, and I tell you, been taking pages of notes, so look forward to following up. So thanks for having me here today, Peter. It was 20 years ago. I was in London on your panel.
Yeah.
So thank you. I'm glad to finally be back.
How long you've been in this business, then, Barry, isn't it? We have seen each other since then, mainly in bars in Dallas. There we go. Actually, remind people, because not everybody will know the brand, because you're not actually opening in UK, but you are, as you said, obviously in America, in the States, in Mexico, and in the Gulf. How many sites have you? And do you want to describe what the concept is?
Sure. So Fogo de Chão is an authentic brand from southern Brazil. So we're a 42-year-old brand. The way we describe it is we're from Brazil, growing in major capital cities of the world. Remember, being 42 years, we have 54 restaurants. So we're really a pretty small brand with, I would say, a pretty big footprint. Now in the US, 22 years ago, we opened our first restaurant in Addison, Texas. And the brand won Hot Concept of the Year, just being different. Now you see similar concepts opening that are like it. I would say we focus on being the category leader, the authentic choice. And with Harrison and a lot of people on this call, we've partnered with how we continue to modernize it and how we look forward to the next 40 years. What's important to that, it's all rooted in hospitality. And Jim said it, look, we drive efficiency. We do that because we're operators, but really we start our strategy and all the things we do every year, it begins and ends each year with how do we enhance our guest experience and our team member experience each year, and how do we make it better? How do we give more experience? And obviously this whole COVID thing has, accelerated a lot of that, which has really been challenging, but also allowed us to innovate, not be afraid. But, small footprint, but excited to know that, we're coming back out from no off-premise sales for 42 years. So as Sarah said, in 48 hours, we launched our butchery to go, our curbside pickup, but we gave all that energy and autonomy to the operator in the field and just said, your customer. Our biggest parameter, we said, just like everybody here on the call, we had to make tough choices and furlough. But what we said was we wouldn't leave those who were most vulnerable behind. This is what I love about our industry, and all of us have done it in one way or form. But what we know how to do is feed people. So when the doors were locked, we had food, we just kept feeding people. We fed our employees for 40 years, so we kept doing it. But in that, we also brought food to people who need it, and we delivered to those who didn't have it. And we still do that. That just is part of why we're here. That's the joy that we have. But now I'll just say this, 7 months later, we're focusing on our journey back to joy. Our teams are grateful to be back in the restaurants. Our sales this whole weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we're 108% up versus last year. We're 3% off premise, so it's all in dining room. We're focusing on giving that hospitality experience and allowing our guests to indulge and enjoy. I really do think that's the path back. It's not easy, but we're excited to go back. We're focusing back to growth.
So how different are your restaurants now as a result of the pandemic, or are they essentially still the same? What changed?
We focus more on just, really, and I think each of you said it, look, it's about how do we make sure our team members are safe. We established 12 promises. Our team members made those what they felt were strongest to make sure that we communicated the most important things the staff was telling them. Their local customers were telling them. So we define it into our 12 promises. We do health checks. We measure it. We're very transparent with our team, and we work with them. And ultimately, we guided that through them, and we have feedback loops frequently, and we're totally engaged with them regarding that. So that's the biggest change of just how much more transparent. And I think Luke brought it up. Just team members want that visibility. The technology Harry has to do that, very powerful. So for us, we're just continuing doing that. I would say restaurants have always been healthy and safe by far. This has just added a whole nother dimension of how do you do it with technology? How do you record it? And then two, how do you give the consumer confidence that you're doing it? Now I'm going to say this, how quickly that has to be the backdrop, because why guests come to you isn't because if they expect that. What they expect is they don't want COVID service, they want hospitality and want to enjoy their time out when they do make the effort to come out to your dining rooms. So
are your dining rooms physically different, or or does that differ? Because obviously what we've been hearing, in UK we've got our own tiers, but there's only 3, and we haven't quite got that myriad of different regulations that say you've got in the States where the bulk of your restaurants are.
Well, as Jim laid out, there's, by county, everything's different. So, and then sometimes by county, there's different politicians that believe different things, and they may do that. So that's where the GM has been highly adaptive. We allow them to adjust as necessary. The only thing we say is, remember, we've got to also balance it with capturing revenue. So if there's an offset to a closed dining room, what can you do? I'll give you an example. The most physical change still in effect on a Friday afternoon. If you recall, California opened up on a Friday afternoon. Gavin Newsom closed our restaurants. So the team, we just let them roll. By 5 p.m., we had all of our restaurants in Beverly Hills, all of our tables, in the parking lot. So the last 2 months, we've been positive in sales in the parking lot of Beverly Hills than we were in the dining room. Our dining room's still not open. Just shows you where the customer wants to be. They want to dine and enjoy an experience. You got to deliver a great experience. You got to give them more. You got to lean into hospitality. So structurally, I'll just say this, we've been more adaptive to the needs in the moment and not focusing on structurally changing our asset, because our asset's been pretty flexible anyway, our model, including our market table. Market table we deliver to the table, and then now we have guests wanting to go back to the market table, so we do it in an adjusted way. But I would say it's really more about hospitality, less about the physical aspect.
Yeah, your market table, people don't know. It's sort of it is where a lot of your starters are. It's all fresh salads or whatever. It's sort of a buffet style. So yeah, right. So you have to control it.
And that's not going away. Guests don't want it. Our guests love it. But we add a lot more exotic and make it more fun and interesting. So it's good. But I'll just say this one thing too: this journey back to joy and the idea. Look, the pandemic's going to end. I think, like Jim said, we've learned a lot, and we got to be prepared that a lot of these practices will be in place and may come back up. We furloughed 2,900 employees, and I would say as of yesterday, we have just over 3,200 employees back. So we have rehired, and this is why our sales continue to grow, because we're staffing to capture and deliver, and we're wanting to build up to 3,800 by the holidays. So we do believe. The holidays are going to be challenging with weather, and we're going to have to adapt, but we're going to need employees to do it. We're going to do everything we can to deliver great experience.
But obviously, you're in Mexico City. You're opening new stores. I mean, is is, you know, look, Mexico's got COVID as well as anywhere else. I mean, tell us a bit about what's happening in that country. What gives you the confidence to open up? And
well, we've got a great partner, and we're in great locations, and like consumer behavior all around the world, ultimately, as Alex pointed to, those that are first willing to come out, that are more, I would say, less anxious, have less anxiety about it. I would say the people who are, you know, in our industry, the people who are working every day through the pandemic are probably more comfortable. So those people are coming out, and they just want service, and they want an experience, and they are, as Alex said, they are trading up. They want indulgent. They'll have a bottle of wine, they'll have a Wagyu steak. Pre-COVID, we sold 300 Wagyu steaks a week. Now we're selling 1,600 Wagyu steaks a week. So
right,
Bill and Joel, they're buying up because, look, remember hospitality and joy. There's function and joy. Function is going through a drive-thru and getting lunch. But, you know, when I want to go out and have joy, I want to be around people, and I just want to feel normal, not new normal. I just want to feel normal and enjoy the time that I'm out. So that's what we're focusing on, and we see the benefits of that.
Yeah, but what you see financially though. So what about the States? Have you got new sites in the pipeline of opening in the States?
Yeah. So we're just about to sign our 4th lease for next year for 21, and we've got 3 to 4 LOIs in a pipeline. And we've got a partner here in Mexico who's looking to open 1 or 2, and in Brazil we're looking to open 1 or 2. So look, the markets are challenged, but just like New York and everywhere around the world, great cities aren't going to go away. Now, I can't predict when the time's going to happen, but as you know, with the fallout, there's also, it's an incredibly opportunistic time to grow, a time to recruit great talent, a time to take great locations, and obviously continue investing in, you know, what we have in front of us. So we've been here 40 years. So now we're just focusing on the next 40 years where we feel we'll be back to where we're going.
But obviously financially, you're confident that those sites will have a return. So you're confident that there is the trade there.
Well, we've already seen it across the U.S. And again, you have certain cities like Manhattan's more restricted. You got the mayor and the governor arguing it out. So that's just going to take time, but eventually
we have those sort of arguments in the UK.
So in Dallas, proper to North Dallas, 2 different views, but we just adapt and focus on the customer and our team member, and just, you know, we try not to get involved with that, and we just try to do our best, and that's paying off. But we see
have you had to close any sites?
You know, I'd say this: we've closed no sites. Again, the collective nature, right when it happened, we spoke with all our landlords, every one of our vendors, and we just put a plan in to collectively work through it, including our team members. And, you know, fortunately we were there. We've always been a prudent company. You know, we had cash on the balance sheet. We went after every available benefit the government could give us, and none of it we were available for, so we couldn't leverage that. So we just had to fend for ourselves, like a lot of people have in this industry. And this way, again, I'm humbled by our industry, the people who lead it, that people are still doing it. So I would say, you know, we're getting back to the strength of our balance sheet. We have visibility where we'll be, and we feel confident that we can manage through and continue to get back to growth. It's going to take time, but we're going to lean into the opportunity.
Yeah, because obviously one of the trends we're seeing globally, actually, people avoiding city centres, people staying in suburbs, and I must admit, it was exactly a year ago today that we were in Fogo de Chão, just outside in the suburbs of DC.
That's right. That's right.
Starting the Olympic Club Tour. Are you seeing those sites? Are those sites sort of out of town, away from the city centre, going to become more attractive? And do you think that's going to be a long-term trend?
Well, I think I'll say this, you know, remember the things that have happened in cities before, prior to this, from 9/11 on, the cities came back. So I tell my team that, look, let's don't make all our decisions based on what we're experiencing today. It's like a hurricane just came through. We got to have a strategy and a vision. And, you know, Jim talked about it, strategic thinking and critical thinking, to say, what's the likelihood of New York going away? It's not. It's going to be tough. It's going to be challenging. The politics make it worse. But really, there's property owners, there's landowners, there's small businesses, there's communities that need to survive, and they will fight to survive. And that's what we're part of. So we're not going to go away. We're going to have great conversations with landlords, and we're going to keep going. And it's going to create an opportunity. And New York is going to come back. London's going to come back. So we know none of us here on the call can predict when, but we already see it coming back. We're opportunistic. Now, if they close us again, we're going to have to go through that pain, but we're ready for it. We've got every scenario lined out, and just keep planning through.
And I think that's what we're seeing in the UK, that we're getting new closures coming through. And I think that's interesting what you say about communities. Stay close to your communities and your people. Barry, we will not leave it another 20 years until we do another,
Please.
another panel together. Look, thanks so much for your time. And
Okay.
you know, to the guys on the call, Barry's a stalwart of the Atlantic Club. So when we actually do get back on the road and back in planes again, I'm sure we'll be all meeting up. But for the moment, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to Barry McGowan. Thanks, Barry.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Well, that brings us to the end of another webinar from Atlantic Club and CGA. Can I ask Alex to come and join me and perhaps sum up what we've heard today, because we've covered an awful lot of ground. But I think despite all the difficulties, we're seeing it is a shared issue, that we're all suffering from new restrictions. We're feeling it. Sometimes I think we feel if we're in a particular country, it's only us getting it, but unfortunately there are other people as well. And learning how people are trading through, I think, is pretty crucial. Alex, what did you get out of today? Because you started today with all that great data, and then obviously you've heard a lot of the practicalities, where it's about brands, where it's about the people, and then Barry, that optimism about a big brand. So how are you seeing it?
I think the big thing that's come through is just how actually as an on-premise industry we are all in this together. It doesn't really matter what market we are currently operating in. Actually, we're all operating in a tough time, and we're all having to adapt. I think the big thing is that we are an innovative industry. We are an industry that is going to continue to fight on. Whether that innovation is health and safety, or technology, or how we support and train our teams, or in the delivery mechanism as a whole, that innovation is coming through. And then I think the big thing is about that adaptability, that flexibility, and that resilience to be able to continue to give consumers that hospitality experience, because consumers want it, consumers are craving it, and the more we can give them that and make it feel normal again to be out in the on-premise, I think the quicker and the better we are going to be at surviving through the pandemic overall.
Yeah, and I think something we said even the last time we did one of these seminars, that you've got to be flexible and adaptable, because I think the only thing that's certain is the uncertainty, that we are going to get new restrictions. Something else is going to be slung at the market. So thank you, Alex. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you in particular to Jim joining us. And as I said, he'll be back on a webinar, a special leadership webinar on December the 2nd, and we'll be sending you details of that and the follow-up half-day workshop we're planning in the springtime. So thank you to Jim and Sarah and Alex and Terry and Luke, and of course Barry at the end. A lot of data there and a lot of insight. And thank you to our partners in Harrison, Harry and Herman Stewart, and of course my colleagues at CGA for actually putting on today. It's a challenging time, but we will get through this, I'm sure, and hopefully we'll see you again very soon. Good night and good luck. Bye.